Pleasure to be here, everybody. Nice to meet you all. Thank you for having me. I am absolutely a community college attendee myself in several different stints of my life, so I'll talk a little bit about that. Professionally, so I'm a partner at Baker Tilly. Baker Tilly is a top 10 CPA firm in the US with about 5,500 employees. I'm the managing partner of our Orange County and San Diego office, and I'm in the audit group as a practitioner. So I kind of grew up through the very traditional sort of core services in audit. So I was a community college product myself. I went to Saddleback before I went to my undergrad at Chapman. And then when I graduated from Chapman, I was a finance major. I actually didn't go through the accounting program there. And I made my way into public accounting and realized, boy, I really need to go and get my CPA license. And so I went back to community college to get all the accounting units that I needed at that point to go and be able to sit for the test. So I went to several community colleges at that point, picked up the extra units while I was working full time in audit, and completed my units, sat for the test, completed that successfully, and have really enjoyed my career since then. Worked my way through the ranks and have been more or less at the same firm for 16 years now. Very, very happy with the firm and all of the opportunity that public accounting can offer, not just in audit and tax, but in lots of different ways. So that's kind of a bit about myself and my background.
Awesome. Can you discuss the various, disciplines within accounting, like, public accounting versus government, or just maybe take a few minutes and briefly just talk about those different channels?
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about how many different pathways you can take with a credential or a CPA license and some background in accounting. And it's really true. It's very, very broad. Public accounting is something that we're all sort of taught is a good starting place, because you get to learn a lot about different industries. You get to work with a lot of different clients. What I tell people about public accounting is that what you're going to get to experience is all the best practices and frankly worst practices that your clients are putting in within their own businesses, and you get to develop your own style by seeing all of those different ways of doing essentially the same thing, right? Take it a bank reconciliation or an accounts receivable reconciliation. You get to see it done 20 different ways in 20 different industries, and that affords you the ability to have a very broad background. And that broad background can be applied in a lot of different ways. Now, I don't mean to imply that going to public accounting is the only way to get started in accounting. It's not. There's a lot of different pathways, and I see people develop very successful careers through many different pathways. So, public accounting might be one. Private accounting, working in industry, clearly, a great pathway for some professionals. Government, you mentioned as another one, wealth management, consulting of various sorts. You see people start their own firms, start from scratch and build a business with that entrepreneurial spirit. You see people work for family businesses. There's just so much that you can do with it. But my experience has been in public accounting primarily. So that's kind of the perspective that I bring. One thing that I would say, and a trend that we've been seeing kind of recently within public accounting, is that the traditional pathways, again, being audit or tax, right? We're always sort of taught, well, you need to pick a lane, either go to audit or go to tax if you're of a firm of a certain size. Sometimes smaller practices allow you to do a little bit of both. But once you get to a firm of a certain size, you generally pick audit or tax. But the reality is there's a whole bunch of other services that public accounting firms do that are outside of those core services. And that could be things like CFO advisory services, which are more consulting services. It could be risk advisory, which is more internal control. It could be transaction advisory services. So that's mergers and acquisitions. Could be wealth management. There's all kinds of things that public accounting firms do outside of audit and tax. And the trend that we're seeing is that you don't necessarily have to be a 5-year person or a 10-year person to get into those tracks. Very often those practices are hiring directly out of school. And so you have choices today, even within public accounting, that weren't traditional or common choices 5, 7, 10 years ago. And that's really opening up even more opportunity for people to explore what they really care about, what they're really passionate about. And at the end of the day, that's what's going to make you successful. It's being passionate, being putting your heart and your soul and your mind into your work, but also, finding what that is. And sometimes a career in public accounting is great for doing that. It can help you get exposure to different areas, and then you learn your passion. One more thing before I finish this long-winded answer to your question, Kevin. But one thing I find when it comes to industries is that people are often very surprised by what they become passionate about and what they truly are interested in. You hear sometimes people say, I really want to get into real estate, or I really want to get into technology, or whatever it is. And sometimes you go into that and they find, oh boy, it's everything I ever hoped it would be. And sometimes they say, you know what, I thought I wanted that, but really found that something else spoke to me that I never would have imagined I had an interest in. And that happened to me within the technology practice in public accounting. I never thought I'd be interested in software companies. And I started working on a few of them. And I really just found something that I really loved. And I've done lots of different things. I've done manufacturing, I've done real estate, I've done some financial services, earlier in my career. And I really gravitated towards technology, and I never thought that would have been the case. So my advice to people is always try a few different things, see what speaks to you. And when you find something that you're passionate about, let your firm know that this is what I'm interested in. And if the firm is supporting its people as it should, they'll find a way to get you more of that type of work.
Just real briefly, for those students that are just like new to accounting, can you just maybe just a couple sentences explain what is audit and what is tax?
Sure, absolutely. So what audit is more on the accounting side of being a CPA. So audit is the practice of certifying a business's financial information. Any business that is going to go and raise capital or be a public company or report to a bank can't just make up their financial information, put it on a piece of paper, and give it to a user of those financial statements. That data, that statement needs to be certified by a CPA. And the audit practice is the practice of verifying that those numbers are reasonably stated in accordance with GAAP. So it is an assurance service. Tax is not just preparing tax returns on behalf of clients, although that is a big piece of it, but advising on tax structures, working with international structures, working with various agencies, local agencies. Like, for example, many corporations these days operate across many state lines and operate across many international lines. So a tax professional needs to be able to handle not just an individual's tax return, but all of the returns that a corporation may be required to file to comply with all of the jurisdictions that they operate in. So tax goes well beyond preparing a tax return for an individual or a corporation. We've got tax groups that focus on M&A transactions, for example. So you may start in tax and learn, all about tax compliance, the various returns that you do, but then find you're interested in mergers and acquisitions as well, and apply that tax knowledge that you have to M&A, and go into that and say, well, how should a company structure from a tax standpoint a acquisition that they're seeking so that it's tax efficient? And you're part of that negotiation between those two parties, advising your client on a tax structure for that transaction. Fascinating stuff, and highly, highly valuable. Can you imagine if a merger and acquisition transaction, say a $25 million transaction, if it's structured one way, could cost your client millions of dollars in taxes, or structured another way, save them millions of dollars in taxes? That's a high value service that you're offering. And when you get good at that, you can do very, very well for yourself by saving your clients millions of dollars in taxes.
All right. And being a product of the community college system, what advice would you give to these students that do probably plan to transfer? I know Jewel, like a little different situation. She had a 4-year degree from UCI, came here and took a couple of accounting courses and is now pursuing a master's. But the typical student that's transferring, or even like Jewel's situation, what do you recommend for those students that are maybe outside that traditional pathway of just going to a 4-year? Any advice you care to give them there?
Yeah, my advice is just get engaged with all of the resources that are available through your college as soon as you possibly can. And some of those are, Kevin, you can probably speak to the specific programs at Coastline much better than I can. But you do see Meet the Firms events. You do see many of the 4-year colleges inviting the students from the community college program to join some of the programs that they have. Get engaged as soon as you can, because the most important thing is not it's not GPA. It's not how good you are at your debits and credits, or how much you know about financial statements at this stage. It's really just about knowing what opportunities are out there and getting connected with as many of the professionals in the community as you can, and getting to know what opportunities are out there. And there's a lot. And I'll tell you this: we start recruiting for our first year associates very early in your education process these days. In many cases, we're talking to sophomores in college. At that point, several of them haven't taken very many accounting courses. They may have taken financial accounting or managerial accounting, but they still have a long way to go in their accounting education. And we're talking to them at that point. So the sooner you can get engaged with the resources available through your program, the better.
Awesome. And I know this is an uncomfortable discussion, but I'd really like to go there. And you and I think, have talked about it a little bit, but if our students don't look like you or I, there's, in the past, I think accounting, public accounting has always kind of had a certain mold. Can you speak just a little bit on the areas in which you feel like that's changing, or if it's not changing?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, Kevin. Not uncomfortable at all. In fact, a really important discussion that needs to be had. So diversity and inclusion is not just the right thing to do, it's necessary for success. And I think in general, our society is learning that in a big way right now. We've got diversity and inclusion programs within our firm that we take extremely seriously. We've invested in a lot of different ways. And it's a difficult subject because it's not easy to implement necessarily. But I can tell you this, I was tasked with within our firm doing a assessment of our diversity and inclusiveness in our Orange County and San Diego office. Okay. So let's define real quick what is diversity and what's inclusion. Diversity is, did you get invited to the dance? Inclusion is, did someone ask you to dance? And that's just a quick way of kind of summarizing it. Okay. Diversity, it isn't that hard to assess. It's demographics, it's math. Either you are diverse and you can move on to the next step, or if you're not diverse, you need to think of ways that you can become diverse. And the reason I think it is so critical to be diverse is that our clients are diverse. Our firm is diverse in the markets that we serve. And if we are not employing individuals that bring the perspective to serve those communities, to serve those clients, we're missing out on huge opportunity and we're not servicing our clients properly. So that's why I say, despite it just being the right thing to do, it is absolutely critical to the success of the organization. So I will tell you, I went through this process internally. And step one is, are we diverse? And I think we knew in our office anecdotally that we were, but it was an interesting exercise for me to say, I want to see the numbers. Let's get into the detail and let's have some tough discussions, and let's look at ourselves in the mirror and say, are we diverse? I think that came back and said, yes, we are diverse. And it's like, okay, great. We're starting at that point. But the second component of that is inclusiveness. And inclusiveness is much more difficult to assess than diversity because it's not a mathematical calculation. Inclusiveness means, are we providing the same opportunities? Are we providing the same exposure to all of the diverse groups within our organization? And that's much more difficult to assess because it's impacted by an organization's culture, the day-to-day decisions, the individual experiences of our people within the firm. Are they getting the same exposure? And sometimes these are minute decisions that are made 100 times a day that either make you inclusive or not inclusive. And if you're not inclusive, you've got to find a way to change that culture and ensure that everybody is getting an equal opportunity for advancement and for exposure and to do the things that they're passionate about in their careers.
That's awesome. Thank you. We do have a question here from Jessica. Please, if anyone else has some, feel free to type them in the chat here. But do you generally need a degree in accounting/finance to get a job in those areas? I'm assuming you're talking about CPA work. Jessica, if you could clarify that, that'd be great. Yes. Okay. Yeah. As I'll let Thomas do that, but then I'll also read the rest of the question. Can you get a job in the industry with a general business degree instead? I guess, so it's kind of a twofold question.
Yeah, and it's a great question. So there's the traditional pathway. Okay, the traditional pathway has been get an accounting degree and then get a CPA license, and then kind of the world is your oyster. I mean, that pathway is very, very viable and very much a positive thing, but it's absolutely not the only way that you can get a career in public accounting. We hire people with other degrees. Our regional managing partner is an English major. We have opportunities in data science. We have opportunities in business administration, and you don't have to have a CPA license to be successful in accounting. I will tell you, it is a valuable credential. I'm not going to tell you it's not valuable. It is. And not only is it valuable, but it's yours. It's not the firm's. And you get to take it with you in your life and your career. And it does mean something, but it's not the only way to be successful. And so we absolutely hire people outside of that. Now, if you want to be a partner in an audit practice, you probably should get a CPA license. But there are other ways to have very successful careers without doing that.
Awesome. And I see here, so I currently work at a bank and I'm interested in working in loan servicing or payroll, I think. I'm not really sure which I wanted to apply to internally, but I'm just not sure if this is going to be the right path with in a finance environment. So I think your question is it loan service or payroll? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I guess the question is in what capacity do you want to work in loan servicing or payroll? Do you want to work for an organization that offers that as a service, or do you want to be a consultant to companies that operate in that business? Because those would be two very different career paths.
Nika, did that answer your question, or?
I think I answered the question with another question. That's a great field. I mean, I'll tell you, financial services is a really, really good field to be in.
Yes and yes.
Yeah, yes and yes. I mean, look, there's a lot of ways that you can work in that industry, and it doesn't have to be working for Loan Depot, for example. That's one way to do it, right? You could go and work for Loan Depot or any of the other financial services or, Bank of America or something like that, in their loan servicing. The other thing that you could do is, for example, work in public accounting and service the financial services industry. You could work for a, payroll outsourcing firm and focus on the financial services industry. So there's a lot of ways that you could touch loan processing without working for a loan processing company.
That's awesome. So, any other fantastic questions here? Jewel, do you have any questions from a partner, being that you work at a different firm?
Oh, so I actually invited 2 of my coworkers at BDO. They're in the Zoom session as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I have a question. So I started as an intern in international tax, and I'm an associate. When is it appropriate to, I guess, switch firms? Or, I mean, I'm not sure if it's a good question, but I guess.
No, it's a great question, Jewel. So first of all, are you in the Costa Mesa office of BDO?
Yes, and then
Okay.
I actually talked to Garrett when I was interviewing for BDO at Baker.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Look, BDO is a great firm. Very, very large firm. It's bigger than Baker Tilly. It's got a very good reputation. It's got a very good brand. You've landed at a good spot. I would say, when is it appropriate to shop for another job? Well, this is a big question, I'll tell you that. And there's a lot of individual considerations that need to be here. Let me make a couple of high-level comments, and I'd be happy to talk, offline about any specific career considerations. And this would not be a recruiting discussion of any sort. Let me just make that clear. I'm only interested in advising from a high level any individual questions. So, a couple of things. One is I do not think it's the right move to switch public accounting firms because another firm will pay you $5,000 a year more. Okay. You got to think longer term than that. And, a compensation increase in the short term could cost you a tremendous amount of compensation in the long term. Secondly, you really got to think about what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And switching firms involves a big commitment to start over in terms of the relationships that you build. You start over with the new client list. At some point, what I advise people to do is make sure that you stay somewhere long enough to show accomplishment in that role. Not just put, a firm on a resume and say, I'm going to move on, but show accomplishment and be there long enough to really understand, what the opportunity is. Now, that's not to say that if you're in the wrong opportunity, that you shouldn't, seek ways to improve the situation. And the times, in my opinion, where you're in the wrong situation is where it could be personality conflicts, right? That could potentially mean you're in the wrong situation. That doesn't mean you need to switch firms. It might mean that you need to have a discussion about, which group is right for you within a firm. The other reason you could be in the wrong situation is if you just genuinely feel like there isn't a future, where you're not accomplishing your overall career goals, the long-term goals, not the $5,000 a year more in compensation. And there's a whole bunch of other considerations. So, I stayed at Baker Tilly 16 years, and my approach to it was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And, don't switch just to switch, and don't switch to follow a whim of trends or something. There's much bigger considerations to think about. Go ahead.
How did you know that you liked audit?
Let me be totally honest and frank with you. Some of the day-to-day stuff that you do in accounting is not that fun. Not every debit and every credit is super sexy. It's not. The day-to-day is part of building a foundation of knowledge and a foundation of skill that you can apply to your career. What's rewarding about a career in public accounting is the relationships. It's the people that you work with in your organization. It's the clients that you care about. Again, it comes down to passion. When you care about your client, it's not about the debits and the credits. Those are important, right? Don't get me wrong. That's the base of the service that we provide. Or in your case, international tax, which, sounds really amazing too, but some of the day-to-day may be mundane. That's the reality of that too. The fulfillment that you're going to get from your career is, going to come from being a trusted advisor. It's going to come from a relationship, and that's going to include both internal and external relationships.
Thank you.
But stick out some of that stuff, some of the mundane day-to-day stuff, you got to learn it. You got to go through it. As you advance in your career, you're going to have less and less of that. You're going to have less of the day-to-day debits and credits and more of the management side of the business, more of influencing relationships, influencing a market, and that changes as your career develops.